properly operate. Right. Good morning again to you all. It has been, I think, an exciting morning so far, certainly full of interesting conversation concerning important topics related to European economic policy challenges. And I have the sense that this session is going to be at least as interesting as the previous ones, for the very simple reason that this is going to be a difficult session. It is going to be a difficult session because the question on whether we can tackle the energy crisis we are in, while at the same time accelerating the green transition, is not the easiest of the dilemmas that are currently facing European policymakers, but also policymakers beyond Europe's border. And I'm very glad to have the chance today to have this conversation with an important panel that I am about to present you now. First, in alphabetical order, is Guy Debelle. Guy is joining us online from Australia. Guy is the CFO of Fortescue Future Industries and the former Deputy Governor of the Reserves Bank of Australia. Hello, and thanks for joining us online. Next, hi. Hello. Next, we have Jos Delbeke. Jos is a professor at the School of Transnational Governance in Florence, and as you all know, has been for many, many years the Director General of DG Clima and has been the main architect of the emission trading system, Europe's main climate policy. We are then joined by Ebru Özdemir, Chairwoman of Limak Investments from Turkey, and last but not the least, by Philip Steinberg, who is, as you know, the Director General of Economic Policy at the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy. Before getting into our conversation today, I would like to make a little announcement. Typically, these little announcements, like at the church, come at the end, but let me do one at the start. And the announcement is that in view of this event today, we have released this morning a new paper together with Georg Zachman, Ben Wegmilliams, and Giovanni Sgaravatti on the EU energy crisis response, a paper entitled A Grand Bargain to Steer Through the European Union Energy Crisis, a paper that you can find in our website now available, a paper which was a little bit our summer homework before this difficult rentrée, in order to try to map out which can be the elements of a grand bargain on energy among European countries. A bargain aimed, of course, first of all, at tackling the energy crisis and making sure we go through this winter in a resilient manner, but also at putting all the necessary ingredients there to make sure that Europe can systematically and structurally decouple itself from its reliance on fossil fuel imports in, of course, a longer period of time. And timing will be, I think, one of the key dimensions and trade-offs we will be discussing today among the need for short-term interventions that also entails brown solutions and our clear need to foster green alternatives that I think, Philip, as your minister said a few months ago, renewables represent for Europe the energy of freedom, no? And I think that is very, very true. So, Philip, maybe let me start with you, if I may, and ask you, how do you see this difficult topic, not only for Europe in general, but possibly also for Germany in specific? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simone. And actually, I'm the Director General for Economic Policy at the moment, actually, rather for energy company rescue operations. That's what I'm doing. But we are also obviously trying to save energy, and therefore I'm quite happy that here it's quite warm. So we are saving on energy to cool this down. That is, I'm very happy because we have just passed a regulation actually on lowering and increasing in summer temperatures. Okay, on this difficult topic. So obviously the topic of the panel is turning the energy crisis into a climate opportunity, and that's what we are all trying to do, but obviously in a totally different situation. I think that holds true for Germany, of course, for the so-called traffic light coalition, which is not so new anymore, but I think also for the transformation agenda of the Commission. Transformation, of course, was the key buzzword we all were trying to achieve, and we are still doing that. So, but obviously, what has changed, and I think how do I see the relationship between like the EU climate policy, REPowerEU, and the whole ambitious program Fit for 55 and national policies. So maybe very briefly, just so what do we need to do? What are the levels of climate policy intervention? Obviously, there are different ways to structure it. I think that I like to structure it in the way that we have on the first level. Obviously, we need the right framework conditions, the right regulation. That is, in my view, and I think that is still the main government view as well. Obviously, it's the CO2 price. The price signals are still key in this for this climate protection exercise. Obviously, we need to think that into an international European dimension. Then we have to talk about the beautiful topics like carbon border adjustment policies, about a climate club. You know, we are campaigning for a climate club within our G7 presidency, and there's a saying in Berlin sometimes that there are more units within the German government actually trying to form the climate club than actually possible members of the climate club. But of course, we are still positive, and I mean, I believe in it. We believe in it, of course. This shouldn't I don't want to be ironic. So then, obviously, we need to do this rollout, Simone, you talked about, of renewables. Obviously, before the war in the Ukraine, many spoke, obviously, we need renewables, maybe to lower costs, because obviously renewables by now are much cheaper than any other energy. But now, obviously, it's a geostrategic question. And obviously, in Germany, and this is what we obviously need to recognize, and I think we're doing it. I mean, in Germany, we ask ourselves, how could we actually fall into this huge dependency on especially, obviously, Russian oil? I mean, gas, oil also, but gas, 55% of our gas came from Russia. And I mean, my former boss, Sigmar Gabriel, when I talked to him, he asked me, like, in a recent conversation, Philip, can you tell me, how could we do that? How could we do that? How could we actually become so dependent on Russian gas? And I mean, I was his advisor, but I mean, I said, well, you are the energy minister, but I don't go into this. So basically, obviously, we need priorities for renewables on the European level and on the national level. That means speeding up of planification procedures and the whole cutting red tape actually for new renewable projects. We have the efficiency agenda, very important, not so sexy. Efficiency is really something, I mean, which is nitty-gritty. You really need to talk about how much, what thresholds, what standards for buildings and so on. But obviously, 1/3 of the energy is used for warmth in buildings and industry, so that is very important. So basically, we need the right framework conditions, regulatory conditions. That's my first level. Second, and sometimes we talk more about that is support schemes. Obviously, we need support for individuals, but mainly also for the industry, in order to manage this transition, as long as we don't have like a price signal that really does the trick within all this international setup, which is of course highly complicated. So, and then we are talking about obviously all kinds of instruments. In Germany, we are very fond of carbon contracts for difference. We have decarbonization programs, of course, all kinds of credit equity programs and support programs, of course. And then on the third level, we need obviously monitoring on coordination measures. So this is very, in a nutshell, conceptual concept, not very very complex, but obviously it becomes even more complex, or it becomes more complex if you, of course, introduce the European and the international level. And then obviously it's trivial to say that we have externalities, and obviously it's public good, climate and CO2. We need to work together. So nothing new about that. So how to do that? Obviously, I think we need, once again, and we need to do what on the European level, international level, national level, what can be done best, where can we do things. I would tend to think, and that is probably not very new again, that crisis policy is something for member states rather. But I'm going to be a little bit more specific in a minute. And like the general framework conditions, that's something for the EU and the international level. And here, obviously, REPowerEU is sending out strong signals into the member states with ambitious targets for photovoltaic, for of course, energy efficiency for renewables in general, and also obviously the part which is actually aiming at speeding up permission procedures and so on. So basically, this is something in Germany we have already implemented. We have rolled out like very important packages in order to speed up the implementation of or the rolling out of renewables. What is of course necessary given the dependency of Germany from gas, and to a smaller extent also oil and coal from Russia. So I think this is the main challenge. And then the question is, of course, is this energy crisis, is it an opportunity, or is it rather slowing down the whole exercise? And I would say, well, in the short run, it is certainly slowing down the transition. I mean, in Germany, we are, of course, now we are taking out, my green minister, Robert Habeck, actually takes out coal from the reserve, hard coal and lignite from the reserve. And we have this famous debate about nuclear. Just one word on nuclear, if I may, because I have a feeling that in Brussels there's a certain debate about it and some interest in it. I mean, one can debate, and I'm leaving aside the debate, was it wise or not wise to actually quit nuclear in this, and obviously also quitting lignite and coal at the same time, but was ambitious. I leave that aside. But as things stand, we have 3 nuclear power plants still in operation. So a bit more than 3 gigawatts power generation capacity. So if you and they produce about 1.2 to 1.5 terawatt of electricity. Germany needs about 500 terawatts of electricity. So you can see, is that a lot or not? 1.5 or something like that in comparison to 500. And we have, Robert Habeck has just presented yesterday what we call the stress test. So is the electricity system actually, can it actually, even in winter when it's dark and there's no wind, and so can it sustain the necessary electricity demand? And there was the very clear answer was, in principle, yes. There is one stress scenario, the most ambitious scenario, where there might be problems. Therefore, actually, we have 2 power plants in this reserve. So if we had done what is called, we have actually used the uranium a little bit longer, then we would have been able to reduce our dependency from imports from other European countries by 0.5 gigawatts, a generation capacity of 0.5 gigawatts. So this is really not a lot. We would still need 4.6 gigawatts of imports from other countries. So what am I going to say? The only question is, because obviously I believe in European solidarity, we believe in European solidarity, and so I understand that there is concern. So why do Germans pursue this ideologic nuclear policy? I don't I'm agnostic about that really, but but the point is this debate is much bigger than its actual effect. So basically, and I'm coming to an end because we are talking about opportunities. I believe if we really pursue REPowerEU in an ambitious way, if we transform it, or if we take ownership on the national level, actually, and speed up our planning procedures, realize that renewables are so much cheaper than all the other energy sources, especially now, then this can be really an opportunity, this energy crisis, in spite, of course, of the momentary of the problems in the short run and the need actually to take in old energy sources for a short while, because now it has become very clear that actually reducing energy dependency on fossil energies, becoming more decentral, that is not only necessary because of climate protection reasons, but also because of geostrategic reasons, because of economic reasons. And so I really believe if we work together from the European international level, over the European level, to the national level, if we take it seriously, if we all realize that it's not something about ideology, but this is in our own economic interest, then this will be an opportunity.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you so much for raising so many important points, also concerning your own country, which is, of course, in the eye of the storm when it comes to the energy crisis in Europe these days, and of course, he's not the only one there. I think we have a clear pathway in front of us that is at least written down in the REPowerEU strategy, but then the key question becomes whether national governments are or not implementing all the measures that we need to fast-track renewables and energy efficiency interventions, which I think remains very much an open question for the time being. But during the very many points and intervention you did, you mentioned the issue of the CO2 price, and I think that allows me to jump very smoothly to Jos, because over the last months and weeks, we have heard some calls to intervene in the ETS, some ideas of mothballing for a temporary period of time the system, etc. And of course, this is an important conversation to be had, because it took, 2 decades, Jos, to build up that system. So, of course, there is a risk of intervening amid an emergency and disrupting what has been built over a long period of time, no? Okay. So, you have been the main architect of that system, so I think you might have something to tell us about that. How do you see that conversation?
Well, thank you, Simone. And it's indeed a relevant question. What is the role of the ETS in the current upheaval on energy markets? In particular, the fact that gas is no longer available almost, or the reverse is that gas prices are going through the roof. What is the role for the ETS? I think first element is it's important not to dramatize the role of the ETS. It's only a very minor part of the electricity price, but it is a part of the electricity price. Now, the ideas that were raised of mothballing the ETS, or putting the ETS on hold, or putting price caps on the carbon prices, I think are not good ideas, because the carbon price that we are currently having, between roughly 17 to 90 euros per ton of carbon, is really the price that we need as a long-term and structural incentive for bringing new low-carbon technologies to the market. It is an incentive not only for renewables and energy efficiency, but also and mostly so in our industries, because we know there are lots of designs on the table to produce low-carbon steel, low-carbon cement, low-carbon chemicals. The non-ferrous sector is looking for new ways, and we have to reward those investments. So I would strongly defend that the price we are currently having is the right price, or is the right price range, let's put it that way. And I would even challenge those talking about price caps, for example. But is a price cap not a way of undermining our long-term targets? Because if we would put a price cap of what I heard in the public media, the Prime Minister of Poland, a price cap on 30 euros per ton of carbon, that de facto means that the targets for 2030 would not be delivered. So part A is putting a price cap, part B is blowing up, in fact, our targets for 2030 and 2050. So without denying that there is a problem, because the problem basically is that the long-term constant delivery of the ETS was based on fuel switching from coal to gas. And that fuel switching has now de facto come to an end. And that is a problem that we have to face up to, because in the power sector, with the current prices for gas, that machine is no longer working. So there are other machines we have to look for, renewables, energy efficiency, all things, and the new technology in the industrial manufacturing sectors. These are all technologies that have to come to the market sooner rather than later. But putting the ETS on hold is not going to serve as well. Now, recognizing that there is a problem, I would like to make a plea for not letting the carbon price going up. Sometimes I hear prices of 150, 200, 250 euros. Some economists are saying these are the price levels we need to kickstart green hydrogen and other clean technologies. I think that all the plans that I have been observing and the announcements made on green hydrogen are very important. But these are innovative schemes that need to be kickstarted in other ways, because innovations, bringing them to the market, is a completely different and more complicated dynamic than just the carbon price. It's an element of it, but it's not entirely the story. So I would rather see, if we would go for these very high price levels, that the calls for putting the ETS on hold, of having price caps up there, may just intensify. And I think that would be a very bad idea. But what could be done if prices would go through these levels in the short term? I think it could be considered to bring forward a number of allowances that are planned to be brought to the market in 26 or 27 or 28 or 29, in bringing them to the market now to temper, to moderate the price increases that all of a sudden may be there. I personally I do not think that is going to materialize, because there is a recession coming if we listen well to the economic forecasts. We have, on the other hand, more coal burning and coal use in the power stations. So there are many different forces at hand. Prices have come down recently. So I think we are going to find ourselves in the price range of 70 to 90 euros, which may be the right level to swim this crisis through for the coming 1 to 2 years. But if it would be necessary, I would hesitate to see the price level going to the very high ranges that some in the European Parliament, if I hear it, are advocating to kickstart the new technologies. I would be cautious with that, because the ETS is an instrument that pragmatically has been delivering emission reductions, will deliver emission reductions over time, and let's not overly politicize the instrument. That would be my recommendation. Now, of course, there are other elements that are on the table as well. There is the CBAM proposal, the carbon border adjustment. Related to that is the amount of free allowances that industry is still receiving in quite significant amounts. And I think, you know, one goes with the other. You cannot have a protection at the border and continuing with the high amounts of free allocation. I think we have to speak out on that. And that's not what I hear in Brussels. I hear lots of voices from industry saying we need and a CBAM and continuing with the free allocation. Now, with the current prices we are having, free allocation represents quite a fortune. This is quite an amount of money. And so I do rather want to prevent stories coming up at the WTO that we would be overly subsidizing things there. Now, on CBAM, in the first phase, an important instrument. I think it's coming. Let's not dream, it's coming. We don't know precisely the moment from where on it is coming, but with the current carbon prices, it's unavoidable. And in the analysis that were done in the first period, the major impact was on Russia, on Ukraine, and on Turkey. So in the current geopolitical context, the position of Russia, Ukraine, and Turkey has changed quite a little bit. So we have to reflect on that. And there is another worrying element that has not yet materialized, and that is that the United States is going for subsidies rather than charging the carbon content of fuels. And that is another element that we clearly will have to clarify with our colleagues from across the pond. So on the CBAM, we are not yet there. It's coming, but the context has changed a little bit. And in particular, when it comes to free allocation, I think that industry will have to make up its mind. When CBAM is gradually phased in, we will have a gradual phasing out of the free allocation, and deviating from that path may be difficult. Now, talking about free allocation and the amount of money that it represents, I think we should also reflect how free allocation could reward much more those investing in low carbon steel, low carbon cement, low carbon chemicals, low carbon non-ferrous materials, because it represents such an important amount of money. And we could tap through the innovation fund and through other funds the support that we could give to industry to kickstart with the technologies we needed. And that is what, if prices would go higher than what they are, significantly higher in the short term compared to where we are today, and we would bring some allowances to the market earlier rather than later, we could use these revenues to help kickstarting these innovations materializing in private industry. And I think that would accelerate the green transition rather than putting the climate objectives on the back burner. So I think there is a lot to be said, and I will finish up there. I think final comment, the ETS would be extended to heating and transport fuels. Of course, exactly on the moment where all governments are looking for tempering and moderating those price increases. It's important that this extension is happening, but perhaps we need a bit more time given the exceptional situation we are in. Sorry, Simone, I was too long. Thank you.
This is a question that is close to your heart, and it was good to hear your perspective and also a pragmatic proposal about what can be done in the short term to mitigate that. Now, Ebru, if I might turn to you with a sort of request of helping us to push our conversation possibly a little bit beyond Europe's border. You have, of course, a privileged observatory being in Turkey and having activities in a region that is not necessarily coinciding with the European Union. So I would be interested in asking you, how do you see this question that we have now been discussing for the EU at a more global level? And of course, we all know that COP27 is approaching fast. Certainly, that will be a difficult COP. I expect a number of different conversations from the past and difficult conversations. So having your insights on all this would be
okay.
valuable.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much also for the insightful discussion. I mean, it's very interesting. And being in 14 different countries in 3 continents, except Europe. I mean, we're in Eastern Europe, but all these discussions are very interesting, but every country definitely is experiencing this in a very different way. I mean, everybody right now, every morning we wake up and we see the energy prices. And in Africa, for example, there's no energy or it's very expensive. And then we see that we have to reconsider our position of in energy supplies, the sources and securities differently in everywhere. And what we realize is current situation is definitely not sustainable. And shortages in some countries like Kosovo, there's no energy. I mean, the only plant they have is a coal plant, very old, because we distribute electricity in Kosovo. And it's not trustable because it keeps on going out of business and they have to import electricity. And such a country, which is very small and huge issues in the budget, it's a very difficult situation where they are. Or other small countries like Macedonia, Albania, I mean, everybody is suffering in that sense. For example, in Turkey, what Germany has introduced recently in caps, we have started this a couple of months ago already. I mean, energy prices are capped to really protect the households, but the industry is suffering on the other side. I mean, what we see is there's a panic and there's short-term responses in every country, but we are trying to make quick fixes. Some countries are going back to coal production or nuclear or LNG storages, FSRUs everywhere. All the countries are looking for ships to bring gas to their countries. Some are even trying the Arctic fuel fields in Arctic areas. I mean, so people are desperately looking for energy. I mean, like even some are searching for old gas plants with very low efficiency around the world to bring to the country, because the issue is if there's no electricity, this is another issue. I mean, I think the lack of energy is the worst. So the options are hugely damaging for the environment. But I said in the short term, that's what's needed. But we see that there are emergency actions to control the prices, especially ahead of the winter months, and huge protests around the world. Some are even coming to Turkey to ask for gas, if we can provide some gas. And now the COP27 is approaching. It's in Egypt, and probably we will have a different agenda there. I try to be cautiously optimistic because what we need, I mean, optimism is a strategy. This is what we needed. But I think what these challenges probably will help us to reconsider our position, and we have to definitely re-evaluate the whole energy sector. But every crisis is bringing new opportunities. I mean, every country, the private sector especially, we are definitely assessing our usage, sourcing arrangements, and I see that maybe the EU's green agenda will also guide us, guide the other countries to accelerate the transition to the more sustainable energy usage. And the European Commission's REPowerEU strategy, for example, it also aims a fast forward green transition. And this could be the guide to the other countries, because it's generally all these changes come in waves. And we need to definitely merge thinking of energy and the climate. So after COVID, we thought that everybody was going to be nicer, but now seeing all these energy issues, rethinking and reevaluation is becoming very, very important also in the real sector's agenda. Last year, the Eni's, the Italian energy producer CEO, was speaking, and he said that energy is actually technology. So right now, what private sector is doing in a very good way, I think, is investing a lot on the R&D of all the energy. And I think what we will see we already started seeing in hydrogen, in biogas, hydropower, solar, geothermal, and even the small to medium reactors in nuclear is upcoming. So we see, and the way that it's actually coming is from the private sector, the entrepreneurs, the private sector is like investing huge on these R&Ds to look for opportunities. And we expect very, very different, very fast, actually, progress in new energy. And so we will see more diversification in different fields. And we realize that the countries will be very self-sufficient and will look for ways of becoming definitely resilient. So in COP26, the goals were very different, but in 27 in Egypt, we will probably be focusing on the relationship between the energy and the climate. And we will see that will motivate the countries, the government levels, I mean, the universities, the private sector will collaborate on to answer this question. And the other thing is, I want to add that we are in construction, we are in infrastructure. And as you know, the construction sector is actually producing a lot of energy waste. For example, the buildings, especially in the construction and especially in the operation, we consume around 36% of the energy demand, 37% of energy-related carbon dioxide emissions. So these are 22 figures. Probably in 2021, that when everything became faster, these figures has increased. So if we can make upgrades and if we reconsider our existing systems, then the benefit will definitely be more important. For example, right now in the new housing developments, we look for new ways of solar panels, batteries, wind power, so that we can have virtually independent living systems, actually independent of the grid. So these should be new era that we should all look. But of course, the issue can come to, again, the lack of resources. I mean, where we should allocate the resources so that we can benefit from there. And as a last point coming from Turkey, I'd like to speak about the future in Europe. I mean, at one point, probably, as you said also, I mean, with the CBAM, maybe Turkey, Ukraine, and Russia will be the ones that we look for options. I mean, now the Turkish real sector, where Europe is our biggest exporter, where we export to Europe. Now we have to find out how this will affect us. As you said, it's still unknown. But also, the energy crisis caused by the Russian war on Ukraine pushed countries to find new solutions. So Turkish geopolitical position is very important. So when we are looking for new routes, new corridors of energy, and undoubtedly, I think Turkey can play a role here when considering the new routes. But also, I feel like we have a big potential in hydrogen and renewables. For example, we are just starting to build another 1,100 megawatt of solar panels in Turkey. There are numerous panel factories are under being development. So I think Europe should also consider the position, and Turkey could also become a major transit country for the energy as well.
Thank you, Ebru. And I think one of the interesting points you mentioned, and that of course is one of the points that brings some optimism into this difficult debate, is the one related to technology. And I think that if we go back to another energy crisis the world has lived, not all of us, I was not born at the time, but the energy crisis in the 70s. Well, I mean, if you look back at how that functioned as a catalyst for public expenditure into research and development, for example, in solar energy, well, you see that the seeds of the solar panels we have today, the solar technology we have today, were also grown up back then. The Japanese government, the German government, the US government, after the oil shocks, really started to invest more and more seriously into solar energy to diversify away from oil. So I think a very sensible question to be asked, and that's how I would call into the conversation Gui, is how do we see the implications of the current energy crisis for technologies and green technologies in specific? So Gui, I would give you the floor, and thank you again for joining us from Australia.
Thank you very much, Simone. And I'm actually going to pick up on a lot of the optimism from Ebru, because the company I work for now, at least, is very much seizing the opportunities that you've been talking about. And so Fortescue is one of the largest iron ore producers in the world. So just to give you some context, the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions of Fortescue as a company is about on par with that of France as a country. So we're quite up there in the emitting scale, but we're seizing the opportunity to basically decarbonize our own operations by seizing the opportunity in both green energy and particular green hydrogen, but also in decarbonising things like large heavy vehicles, the trains we use in our operations. And so the technology is there. And to pick up on what Bruce said earlier, we are investing a lot in the R&D in implementing that. So we have mining trucks running in our mining operations now on battery electric and hydrogen fuel cells. So the incentive is there now from a commercial point of view, in part because of the very high cost of fossil fuel energy at the moment, particular diesel price, to accelerate all of this spending and accelerate the adoption of these new technologies and accelerate the decarbonisation. So we are, as a company, as a large emitter, particularly through Scope 3, aiming to be decarbonised by 2030, and the technology's there now. It's a question of applying it. So I think we have to recognise that there is a huge opportunity here. And I suppose if I turn that on the energy side, I mean, as I listen, it seems to the conversation we've just been having, I mean, the opportunity from clean energy is only the greater in the light of the circumstance we see at the moment for a number of reasons. I mean, in the end, it's cheaper. Secondly, there's a much greater capacity for energy security because no one owns the sun and the wind and the water, if you want to put it that way. And so there's a much greater capacity for energy security, and it's clean energy. And there's, in the end, almost an unlimited supply of clean energy. There's a question of at what price at the moment, but that price is declining rapidly. And so energy is what's necessary for growth and for standards of living. And clean energy is available. We just have to avail ourselves of it. And yes, that does require more investment and more development, but the technology is rapidly evolving to provide that solution. And I think it's a question of making sure, picking up on some of the comments that Josh made, that we've actually got the environment to facilitate that, because facilitating that is probably going to deliver us at least as great returns as other mechanisms. And I mean, one challenge we're facing as a company, so we are looking to export green energy in the form of hydrogen or green ammonia into Europe, in particular into Germany via E.ON. And one of the challenges we've got there is actually making sure that the European regulatory environment does actually allow for import of green energy from jurisdictions such as Australia, but also other parts of the world. And I suppose I would caution that, make sure that perfection doesn't get in the way of the good. And I understand the rationale behind European regulation to ensure that we're bringing on additional renewables to provide that green energy into Europe. But some of the restrictions around that are actually quite prohibitive for anyone who's coming from outside Europe. And I'd be cautioned in terms of making sure you don't cut off the opportunities that are actually rapidly evolving elsewhere in the world in terms of really cheap or cost-effective green energy production. And I know Josh mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act in the US in terms of hydrogen subsidy. And I think that's an interesting way to think about it. It's effectively equivalent to the contract for difference mechanism that's there in Europe, but it's providing a sort of reasonably energy agnostic incentive to provide clean, to develop clean energy and to get it out there in scale. I think that's the other important point to emphasize, and picks up on what you just said, Simone, about what came out of the oil crisis, is that we need to develop these technologies in scale to realize the economies of scale. And so they are in their infancy at the moment. And so they are fairly high up on the cost curve. But as we develop them in scale, we're going to move rapidly down the cost curve. But we need the incentives to move down that cost curve rapidly. And I'm concerned that if we start backtracking now, that's going to further delay that shift down the cost curve. So the more we look to other browner solutions to provide the near-term substitute, I understand the need to do that in the very short term, but I think we've got to be very careful we don't stand in the way of the opportunity of moving down that cost curve on the green energy solutions. And so I think the capacity, the technologies are rapidly evolving. There's a lot of R&D going into this space all around the world, and that's driven by the price signals which are out there at the moment, which make it, it's both driven by environmental considerations and climate considerations, because we don't, I mean, the more we defer, the quicker we bring on the sort of climate events that we're seeking to avoid. And unfortunately, we've experienced a fair bit of here in Australia over the last few years, as you're experienced in Europe just recently. But the further we delay, the more we hit those events. But we also, the further we delay, I said, the more we defer the solutions coming on board. And I really think that the opportunity, which is driven by those price signals, really got to avail ourselves of. And so, yes, there are environmental considerations, but they're working from a commercial point of view now. You know, we are, from the company I work for, we're seeing those commercial opportunities, and it's actually cost effective to make those investments, to do that R&D. I think we've just got to ensure that whatever policy environment we put around handling the energy crisis at the moment continues to provide those incentives to drive forward. But I said I would really emphasize that the technology's out there and it's rapidly evolving. And the sooner we can bring that technology to scale and realize those economies of scale, you know, the better we are going to be able, the faster we're going to be able to make that transition to a clean energy environment and also a secure energy environment.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. And I think what you said about the need to maintain the investment signals and the certain visibility over what's next for our energy and climate policy also couples very well with what Josh said about the ETS. So in a week where everything in town is about decoupling, it's important to look into something that couples as well. Positive things. So, jokes apart, let me turn to you now, and I see already the first hands raised, so feel free to jump into this conversation. I see Heather there, so please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Heather Graby from Open Society. So I just want to come back to one of the remarks Philippe made at the very beginning about the Climate Club, because it's a very interesting example of minilateralism that aims to drive up ambitions and bring together countries that want to do more. But being done under the G7 aegis, under the German presidency, it does risk also polarizing and alienating countries that need to be part of the energy transition in particular. China is the leading example, but also India, South Africa, and so on. So I'm curious as to your thinking about how to make this major transition, which involves corporate actors, as well as policy, as well as a whole swathe of stakeholders, how to make it a collective endeavor when it's very easy to alienate countries. And how could the Climate Club be used actually to bring others on board? Do you see hope for finding a mechanism for doing that?
Well, the question on Climate Club was a must. So if I may jump to you immediately to give you the floor. And
Okay, there's really a conundrum with this mics. Okay, obviously a very relevant question indeed. I mean, I think we have to, and we are very much aware, of course, of this this problem. I think we have to start with the notion of common but differentiated responsibilities, of course, and that means obviously the industrialized world is responsible for the climate crisis we are in right now, and therefore, of course, we need to design the club in a way that that developing countries obviously have an incentive of joining as well, by, of course, special support schemes, by thresholds, all kinds of measures which actually grants them, obviously, and that's what we all want, of course, the right to development, but maybe obviously not. They don't have to follow our path, you know, in every development step we have taken, but they can actually maybe just leave out one or two steps, like for mobility, you know, they probably don't need like their own diesel car. So I think that there are quite a few options which we can make that attractive. And on a more general note, of course, obviously there are there are fundamental divergences which make it so difficult to actually to advance here. That is, of course, the question of instruments. So what is it? Is it only the CO2 price? Do we have shadow prices that actually other efforts can be accounted for? And that's obviously what we need to find out, or need to actually design. And because obviously it is, I share your optimism, Jos, that it will really be make a from beginning on. I mean, we very much believe in of course a climate club with carbon border adjustment mechanisms, but obviously the devil lies in the detail, you know, like we say in Germany. But I mean, I think in starting from this notion of common but differentiated, difficult word, responsibilities, I think we can find a solution.
Thank you so much, Philip. I think there was a gentleman here on the front.
Thank you, Can Ercan. I'm from the Turkish delegation to the EU, based in Brussels. I'm energy counselor. Czech Justice Minister last week said that the energy crisis will threaten a political system and the existence of the EU. And German Foreign Minister yesterday said that Russian gas supply woes will test European unity. Climate issues also in the long term are transboundary issues, and as Ms. Özdemir said, that underline the role of coal in Balkans with Kosovo example, and decarbonization in the long term requires regional sustainable cooperation and solidarity. So my question is for Mr. Steinberg, do you think the EU will think out of the box? If yes, what are the main vulnerabilities or opportunities for a wider regional cooperation for climate? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And let me reiterate that some of these questions will be also addressed in the paper we published this morning. So just to take something out of your plate, Philip, because it's a complicated question. But maybe let me also put this question in tandem with Georg. I saw Georg also has...
Yeah, I would Georg Sachmann from Bruegel. My question would be both to also Philip and Jos, but essentially to the whole panel. Maybe Simone, you can decide. We are now in front of a completely different global energy situation that will unfold. So energy will potentially be more expensive for longer in Europe, also compared to energy prices in other countries with which we plan and already do trade a lot, namely in North America. And does it still make sense to conduct policies like CBAM and kind of free allowances that essentially favor strongly energy-intensive industries in Europe? Or would it essentially not make more sense to work on a better global sharing of labor, in a sense of we importing energy-intensive products high up on the value chain, and then or very low down on the value chain, and then we do our so basic chemicals, metallurgic products, and then we use those to produce the big value added that keeps our continent rich. So is it really sensible to do these policies we decided long ago in an environment that has completely changed also the comparative advantages globally?
Right, so this is a big complexity. And of course, on top of the political dimension, now we are bringing into the table, Philip, also the future of our economic structure and how that plays out with the new energy environment. So I will give you the floor and then pass the ball back to Jos.
Exactly. I think there's a lot of expertise on this panel here. So very briefly, obviously this question of the energy crisis, a challenge for European unity, think out of the box, chance for cooperation. I mean, my first answer is, I mean, yes, it is, of course, once it's a crisis. I mean, one of the, well, every crisis we are in is the worst, but I guess this one is really particularly complicated. And I mean, I would say, maybe I'm biased, but actually the European Union has performed quite well, actually, concerning sanctions, concerning support, now concerning the debate about the energy market design, actually, which is complicated. We are not there, but I think we are moving there. Everybody is actually thinking out of the box. Like for a very long time, we were proponents of the energy market design we have. No changes, merit order, everything stays in the same. Now we have made a proposition. I think we'll come together. So I mean, having said that, crisis times is a time for member states. Yes, on the one hand, yes, but everything obviously where it's an added value that should be done on the European level, and that is of course the framework conditions I've described, but also of course, I mean, fundamental market principles. I mean, obviously need to be decided here. So I mean, I would say it is a challenge, yes, but I think in my view, I mean, there have been worse times for the EU. And then, I mean, second point, is it a chance for strategic cooperation? I mean, I would say, of course, yes. I mean, definitely so. I mean, even though I tend to actually think that this hype about green hydrogen and import everything from the whole world, and we have to put it into perspective. And there, I think there are other people here on the panel who can say more than I can say. But I think, yes, of course, we do need cooperation with many countries outside of the European Union. And I mean, obviously, energy cooperation is something. I mean, we have a former state secretary is exactly a representative for energy cooperation issues, and so therefore I think absolutely, and I really would think this crisis, as really dramatic it is for the moment and the people and the war, is something we all could not imagine. I think for the energy transition, it is for Europe, but also for cooperation with other countries is a chance.
Thank you, Jos.
Yes, well, I would like to wholeheartedly agree to what Philip said. I think we are only at the beginning of reviewing what we need, a more comprehensive geopolitical strategy. Things have changed dramatically, not only in the energy field, but also the raw materials. And we learned our lesson, we have to diversify. We cannot exclusively rely on one or the other country. So it will bring the EU together. I would hope it brings the neighborhood together. We just heard the elaboration of the dimension with Turkey, but also Ukraine. After the war, we will have a new strategy. We have to look differently at the Mediterranean and at Africa. Countries we hardly talked about are becoming very important when it comes to green hydrogen and things like that. Think about Egypt or Algeria or other countries apart from the Middle East, also sub-Saharan. People are talking about Namibia and Oman, and countries that were not appearing so lively on the international strategy of the EU. So I think we are at the beginning of a process where there is going to be a major rehearsal of things, building away from the exclusive dependency we had from Russia and diversifying our energy resources. And if I look around at what our European ministers from all member states were doing, if you put that together, we are at the beginning of that, but it's not yet coordinated. I saw the German Chancellor was in Canada, redesigning also the way cooperation with Canada. So we are at the beginning of a new reflection on the geopolitical strategy related to energy and also related to raw materials, because after all, the EU continent is relatively empty. We have 250 years of industrial revolution. We were digging out of the underground what we could dig out of the underground. And now we have to look to strategic partnerships with others. And there, in that context, we have to reflect on CBAM, on climate clubs. Let's put it all together in a new dimension that we have to reflect deeply on in Europe. But alone, we will not be able to do that. And how much I like the concept of strategic autonomy, if that would lead to blind protectionism to try to do everything at home or within the EU 27 and a few other countries, that's not going to work. We need to work together with other countries, and then these signs are emerging.
Thank you, Jos. Ebru.
Just add a little bit. I mean, you're very right. It's European Union cannot just act as European Union. You have to think about not just the neighboring countries like Eastern Europe, very small states. I mean, budget deficits, they don't have the energy sources. I mean, they cannot be resilient by themselves, and they don't have the power to buy high-priced electricity. Africa, they have the resources, but they cannot use these resources because they have gas, but they cannot take the gas out. So I think we need a more global and more approach. I mean, we have to think each other. We cannot leave anyone behind. But what Guy said was very right. I mean, for years before COVID, electricity prices were very low. I mean, we were selling electricity at 2 cents, $2 $3, and nobody made investments that time. But right now, the reason, unfortunately, I mean, private sector is like that. Everybody is in because the prices are high. So this could, I mean, I don't want these prices to be high this long, but this now probably is just having everyone putting their minds and energy and efficiency and everything into this so that we'll see very rapid technological steps very fast. But the idea is we have to be open to these technology wherever it's coming from. The new technology may come from other countries except European Union, but then we have to really add more resources to it to develop further.
Thank you, Ebru. And let me seize the occasion, since we are approaching the end of this session, to also give back the word to Guy, so that you might also give us your perspective, and then we will close also with Philip. So Guy, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Simone. And I want to pick up on what Jos and Ebru just said. I mean, and Jos is right. I mean, so the change in energy source is actually changing comparative advantage across the whole world. I mean, a country like Namibia, which Jos rightly highlights, is now looking at an amazing opportunity to be an energy exporter, which completely is transformative to them. And I think it's interesting in terms of climate clubs, in terms of the countries you're thinking about. Even South Africa has got great opportunities in the clean energy front. So the sort of dichotomy we'd had in the past around climate discussions between the developed and the developing world is actually changing quite rapidly between those which are have got good endowments of clean energy sources and those that haven't. And that isn't a developing split. You know, as I think Jos said, you know, in Europe, there's not a big endowment of clean energy because you've sort of already used it to some extent. So whereas in a bunch of the developing countries like Namibia, like a Morocco, like an Oman, like an Egypt, there are a lot of opportunities here. So that is actually going to be quite transformative for the economic landscape, and particularly the energy landscape. But as Ebru just said, I mean, you've got to realize that these energy sources are, you know, coming from different places with different, and there are both opportunities there, including for Europe to get alongside some of these countries. And, you know, to some extent, I think, you know, a country like in Namibia, it's a win-win for both Europe and Namibia to see that a clean energy industry develop there. So again, trying to possibly, it's easy for me to sit on the other side of the world and try and inject some optimism into the European energy debate, but I do think there are a lot of opportunities out there, and we shouldn't lose sight of them. And as I said, there are opportunities in places that we haven't necessarily thought of, which can actually provide quite a reasonable rebalance of sort of economic opportunity across the globe.
Thank you, Philip. Maybe a last word on the industrial dimension.
Yeah, just on this question. I mean, I tend to agree, of course, and what we are doing, this is what we are doing now. But I mean, when we are now designing support programs and thinking about the whole market design and so on, of course, this question is key. On the other hand, of course, there are two problems. First, of course, this comes at a lightning speed now, of course. I mean, we hoped to phase this in with an increasing CO2 price on whatever level. Now we really have to do that lightning speed, and for countries like Germany, but also, I guess, France and others, obviously, being very dependent on industry and so on. This will be very, very brutal. And then we have this this concept, and we has mentioned it, obviously, of strategic sovereignty, autonomy, we are quite fond of after Corona, you know, so we have to kind of balance this. And this will be really, I mean, this will be really the next challenge, because obviously I totally agree with what you said here, and this is a tremendous challenge as well for cooperation, for developing countries, is still obviously we kind of need to balance this with strategic sovereignty, as much as I believe in the division of labor and so on. So this will be really the task of the next months and years, but that's what we are exactly doing. My minister told me, Philip, please, I don't want to subsidize energy-intensive industries till the end. We have to do something here.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you all in this panel to having shared with us your insights. We are aware of the fact that we are the last obstacle between you and the lunch, so we are now gonna free you up. But before doing that, let me, at this point, really make the last little announcement, which concerns tomorrow conversation continuing at 10:30 with Georg Zachman, discussing options to mitigate the energy shock. And that is, of course, going to be a very timely conversation considering what's going to happen in town next Friday. So thank you again for being with us, and have a good lunch and afternoon. Thank you.